I really want to stress how biased I was toward Islam and against Christianity when I embarked on finding God. At the same time that I was looking into these religious books and reading them, I was also looking into arguments for God's existence, and I found some exceptional arguments. Some of which I had heard before, but for whatever reason hadn't convinced me the first time around, and others that I hadn't. And it was just the fact that there were so many of them to begin with that really helped seal the deal for me. Because it felt like there's so many ways you could approach the question of God's existence and you could still arrive at God existing. Then I just started to find God everywhere, and I don't just mean that in a spiritual sense, but I mean it in that I was finding arguments for him seemingly everywhere. And that included the foundations of science, mathematics, logic, and reason. He seemed everywhere. And it kind of got a little creepy, to be honest, because the more you think about these philosophical questions and about metaphysical things, the more you have to come to terms with the fact that our existence is just strange, no matter how you slice it, no matter what your conclusion ends up being, whether it's a belief in God or falling back on agnosticism or atheism. You ultimately have to accept that there is no answer, no coherent answer that one could give, or that the answer is an unfathomable infinite nothingness or an unfathomable infinite something. I'm not referring to something material. You have to arrive at something immaterial because it just seems self-evident to me that an infinite chain of material things is impossible. So I started reading books that were very helpful in that respect. One of them that sort of married the two, arguments for God's existence and for Christianity, was no other than C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And I'd heard about this book years ago, obviously, and it was something that I heard a lot about from the Christian circles that I often found myself in. But I just always assumed it was some problematic work of apologetics, similar to the works of apologetics that I'd read that were written by Muslims when I was a Muslim, and I found them very cringe. I found them very poorly done, poorly written, poorly researched, unintellectual. But this was not the case with C.S. Lewis at all. Not only was it not the case in terms of just like the intellectual rigor, but he just writes so beautifully, which I'd never read anything by C.S. Lewis before, I'm embarrassed to say. And I've now read several of his works, and he's probably one of my favorite writers ever. He's a genius. I also picked up Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton, and actually the only reason I picked it up, and I didn't know it was like in the same realm of like Mere Christianity in terms of being an accessible sort of philosophical work, and I thought it was just an obscure work. I found it on Amazon, ordered it, and loved it. Very much similar-ish to C.S. Lewis in writing style and in content, but I would say C.S. Lewis is even more accessible than Chesterton. I also picked up other works by Christians making arguments for not just Christianity, but for God's existence, by the likes of Geisler and Turek, like this book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Great arguments. And I also have a couple of books by Greg Koukl, and they're fantastic. There are a lot of works out there. I spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos on these arguments. I watched a ton of debates between atheists and theists, Muslims and Christians, and they were very illuminating. Almost always, I would say the Christians came out on top, with the exception of a few times where I think the atheists did actually a pretty decent job. My politics were shifting around the same time that I was beginning this theological search. Once again, it feels very fortuitous that these things kind of aligned. I don't know what to make of these coincidences. I understand probability. I understand probability. I understand that people even take things that are totally probable as miraculous when they might not be. But also I can allow that if there were a God, he would work within the laws. One thing that happened in the culture, well, two things that shifted my viewpoint in a way that allowed me to not only become comfortable with the conservative positions, but to think that they actually were closer to moral truth and goodness. So I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but I might speak about them in depth in the future. The two big social issues were abortion and trans ideology. The trans thing was pretty big for me because with LGBTQIA issues in general, I had been a little on the fence, but then I got to a point where I genuinely believed that people should just be allowed to do what they want, and the idea was that if people aren't hurting anyone and they're just doing what they're naturally inclined to do and it's out of love, then why shouldn't they be with whomever, so long as it's within certain boundaries, right? Like there's still like restrictions we put in place. But the trans thing came along and I was really thrown for a loop there. At first I was also beginning to be on board with that, to be honest. I remember watching Jazz Jennings when it first came out and I was like, absolutely not. Then I watched the show and I said, well, wow, this kid seemed really desperate, now the kid seems happy, living her best life. Maybe this is okay. Maybe this is okay. Then things were taken up multiple notches, where reality itself was rejected. And that was when I started to say, wait, hold up. I don't know if I'm on board with saying that trans women are women and are no different from actual women. I disliked the fact that it rejected reality and it was a falsehood, and I just could not get behind that. But even then, they were saying that, well, gender is different from biological sex, and I said, I don't know about that. I've never heard this before in my life, but okay, let's say that's the case. It felt like not 2 seconds later, I was hearing that no, biological sex itself is mutable, and that's when I was like, this is insane. At this point, we're already starting to see actual harm coming out of this rejection of reality. Here's what's really fascinating about the trans ideology stuff. I spent so much time looking into that because I really wanted to understand it. It felt like I blinked and society all of a sudden acted as if it didn't know what was true about objective reality when it came to gender or sex. They're interchangeable. And I didn't understand how that happened, to be honest, how we got here. And I learned from people who had spent a ton more time than I did, obviously, looking into this, that this idea that a man can be a woman and vice versa stems from the belief that a person has at their core something that makes them who they are that isn't their physical or material existence. It's very similar to the idea of a soul, which is intriguing because it's essentially a faith-based belief system, but it's presented as a scientific reality, and it's not. That signaled to me that human beings have this innate desire for something faith-based, and that if they don't have that need met in the traditional sense through orthodox expressions of religion, then they will make up their own faith-based system. But it's one that's now being incorporated into the legal system, which is really problematic because it's not seen as one. It's actually way more insidious than someone who's just Christian or Muslim, because they know that their belief system is faith-based and they can talk about it in a way more rational way and debated than someone who believes in men can be women, women can be men. It also reminded me very much of having lived in Saudi Arabia, the morality police who would go around with their megaphones screaming at women to cover their faces, where here it was, you can't say certain things. Blasphemy law is also in a lot of Muslim majority countries where you can't blaspheme like the Prophet. And this was the same, where your words were now being policed based on this totally delusional belief system that's untethered from reality and anything really, and you had no say over it. And it became really frightening once I realized that the scientific community was behind this in many ways, the medical communities were behind this, and then you wonder, well, what's going on? Am I wrong about this? When you just look at it, like surface level analysis of this, you will agree with them, maybe. In one sense you can agree with them, right? It's very Orwellian in that one could read 1984. Even someone who agrees to this system can tell that, oh, clearly the society has been captured, and clearly the society has these structures in place that push one idea forward at the expense of others, and it's not really scientific or really rational, and they're being brainwashed. But when it happens to them, they're incapable of seeing it. And in one sense, one might not need to delve deeper to know, no matter what anyone says, that a man cannot be a woman and a woman cannot be a man. But in another sense, I can totally even get it if people are questioning their sanity, and it's like the emperor's new clothes. You have to pretend that you're seeing his fine clothes. You don't want to be in this case in our society, the hateful person to say, this man is clearly not a woman. And eventually I can actually genuinely think that some people do believe in it. Some people believe in it because they want to believe in it. And I think there are different layers of belief, right? It's like there's a belief where you're even just lying to yourself. So that was really scary. But delving deeper into trying to understand why these professional and scientific and medical organizations were behind this, I realized that not everyone was behind it, but that the people who opposed it were oftentimes silenced. Anyone who spoke out against it was immediately just called a conspiracy theorist, a Nazi, far right, and that was very effective in silencing them. Okay, the next thing was the issue of abortion. I was always pro-choice for as long as I can remember, and I think people should have the right to it, especially in cases of like incest or rape. But I always thought that the pro-life position was not insane, was not anti-woman, was completely rational, because their take is this is murder, this is the taking of a life. And so while I didn't agree, I understood why they believed that, because I knew that if I believed that this was murder, then I would agree with them. It's just that I didn't think that it was murder before a certain point. Of course, if you were to ask me at what point, I'd say I don't know, I don't think it's clear cut. However, there's a point where you can clearly say yes, and there's a point where you can say it doesn't look like it. At what point it happens, I don't know. And I assumed that I could just leave it up to the experts and they would know. However, once again, in the culture, things had shifted enough to where it wasn't just something that people on the left wanted for extreme cases. I saw that people were celebrating abortions, they were proud of them, and they were justifying them even in cases where the pregnancy could have been avoided. And when I realized there were so many places, including where I currently live in the United States, where abortion is effectively allowed up until birth, I felt so disgusted because I knew that, at this point, we're very comfortably in the realm of murder, as I defined it even, as someone who was pro-choice. And I was so disgusted with that, so disgusted with what I kept hearing from the pro-choice side, dehumanizing nature in which they would talk about babies in the womb, calling them not human, not people, fetuses, as if that really takes away their humanity, parasites, of all things. The logic just wasn't making sense anymore. Those aren't positions that pro-choice people traditionally took, and I just felt like the side is not representing me anymore, and it's very vile and cruel and inhumane, and I want nothing to do with it. At the same time, medical technology is advancing enough for us to be able to sustain children outside the womb at earlier and earlier stages in the pregnancy. So maybe previously 20-something weeks might not have been viable outside the mother's womb, but now it is. And so if the age at which a baby can continue to live outside its mother's womb keeps getting younger, at what point does life begin? Why wouldn't life begin at conception? And if it doesn't, who am I to say at what point it does begin? Who's anyone to say that, really? I don't think anyone can say anything other than conception. Like, the best argument that one can make is that, which I'm not going to get into. But independently, I arrived at this long before I started reading the Bible, and I just naturally found my position in a lot of these issues coming closer and closer to what ultimately I learned is the position of many Orthodox Christians. So I kept reading the Gospels, read the entirety of the New Testament eventually, and as I was reading it, I had a lot of questions. I let them lead me where they led me. I sought answers. I didn't just have questions and assume that they were unanswerable, especially since I realized that there were so many fantastic arguments for God's existence that I hadn't heard of before. I didn't want to be arrogant anymore in assuming that I knew that something was unsolvable without looking into it and trying to understand it, especially when people far smarter than I have wrestled with these questions and answered them. Again, completely blown away by the truth I found in the New Testament. I got to a point where I felt that the best explanation for life was Christianity in so many ways. I just saw its influence everywhere in all these positive ways. I think the best explanation for existence is a God. And I think if there were a God and he did want to speak to us, and if he were good, then he must have spoken to us in some way. Perhaps one of these world religions is it. And if there were a true religion, it has to be Christianity. There's nothing else. There's nothing that has history backing it up. There's nothing that has a mystery at the heart of it, the resurrection, that can't really be explained given how the apostles believed it to the point of dying for it. And for what gain? No gain as far as anyone can tell. And then the speed at which it spread, and the good that came out of it, and the good that continues to come out of it. And the core teachings are just so radical, once again. I couldn't falsify it. I really tried to. I think I tried to. I tried as much as I could to. You can't say that for any other religion. I didn't think this was even possible. I started this search hoping to find God, assuming that I would have to just accept something because it just helped me out, knowing that other paths might also be valid or something like that, because that's what I felt like I had to do as a Muslim. No. There's objective truth. Christianity is objectively true in a way that the other religions just aren't. So I felt like I got to a point where I believed intellectually before I even believed in my heart, if that makes sense. Where I almost felt like my mind was telling me this has to be true, but my heart was telling me I don't know if I feel it, I was hoping to have some sort of mystical experience or spiritual experience. Eventually that's the point where I felt like I wanted to go to a church to just see what's up, Is this gonna help me feel something? I don't know. And I visited several churches, and